Hey, I'm Nathan Cole from Fatal Files, and I went down a rabbit hole on some of the dumbest Disneyland stories. And what got me wasn't how extreme they were. It was the fact that it's Disneyland. From a dad stepping into a moving parade just to get a better picture with his kid, to someone getting irritated over a simple refusal and turning it into something it never needed to be. It was July 18th, 2016, in Anaheim, California, and by early afternoon, the parade route had filled in tighter than usual, with families pressed shoulder to shoulder along the barriers, phones raised, waiting for the floats to pass, and from a distance, everything still looked smooth, even though the space between the moving platforms and the crowd had already started to narrow. That's where Daniel Reyes, 36, made a decision that only takes a second to commit to, but doesn't leave room to undo. He was there with his wife and their 8-year-old son, Mateo, on their first trip to Disneyland. It was something they had planned for months, saving where they could, booking everything carefully, building the kind of trip you tell your kid is going to be unforgettable. Daniel worked as a delivery driver, long hours, steady routine, not the kind of job that leaves a lot of room for breaks like this. But this trip mattered to him. He was the one who insisted they do the parade, the photos, the full experience. He wanted Mateo to remember it. I get that mindset more than I probably should, because when you're with family, especially kids, there's this pressure to make moments feel bigger than they actually are. And by that point in the day, they already had a phone full of pictures, poses with various characters and attractions, the kind of everyone takes on at Disney. But Daniel wanted something different, something funny, something that would stand out later. As the frozen float approached, Mateo pointed it out immediately, pulling at his dad's arm, already excited. Daniel stepped forward slightly, angling his phone, then hesitated. And this is where the decision happens. Instead of staying behind the barrier, he stepped over it. Not in a rush, just quick enough that no one stopped him. He moved alongside the float for a couple of seconds, matching its slow speed, holding his phone out, trying to frame himself in front of it like he was part of the scene. It was meant to be a joke, him pretending to join the parade for a split second before stepping back. But the float was still moving. When Daniel jumped, it wasn't a full attempt to climb onto the float, just a quick hop to get himself into frame as it passed. But he misjudged the distance. His foot didn't land where he expected, and instead of finding stable footing, it came down too close to the moving edge. His balance shifted immediately. One foot searched for solid ground, but there wasn't enough space to recover. The forward motion of the float threw off his timing, and within seconds, his footing gave out. He tried to step back, but his movement was out of sync with the float beside him. He lost balance and fell backward onto the pavement, landing hard on his side and back. For a moment, it still looked like a normal fall. But the float continued forward at the same steady pace, and he was now directly behind it, within the clearance space near the rear section. As he tried to get up, the distance closed too quickly. The rear structure made contact first, knocking him back down before he could regain his footing. The vehicle continued moving, and by the time the operator recognized what was happening and initiated a stop, the float had already moved over him. People nearby started reacting, but not immediately. For a few seconds, it still looked like someone trying to get back up. Then, it became clear something was wrong. Emergency responders reached him within minutes, but the injuries were already critical. The report later confirmed severe blunt force trauma consistent with being struck and run over by a moving vehicle, leading to cardiac arrest at the scene. And that's the part that stays with me. One decision, stepping over the barrier for a photo, and there was no time to take it back. And honestly, it hits different knowing his son was right there, because that moment was supposed to be something he'd remember for a good reason. Now let's move on to the next one I came across about a guy at a character meet and greet who got irritated over a simple refusal from Mickey. It was March 9th, 2014, in Anaheim, California, midday, packed crowds, the kind of heat that makes everything feel slower than it actually is. The meet and greet line at Town Square stretched longer than usual, with kids waiting, parents hovering, and staff quietly trying to keep everything moving in a space that only works when people follow the flow. A few spots back stood Darren Holt, 26. He wasn't there for photos. He'd come in with his girlfriend, but by that point, he was already irritated with long lines, slow staff, and what he kept calling pointless rules. He worked in freelance sales, the kind of job where confidence easily turns into stubbornness, especially when things don't go your way. I've been in lines like that where everything starts to feel slower than it actually is, and you catch yourself getting annoyed over things that don't really matter. And what set him off wasn't anything big. It was Mickey. Darren had a folded document in his bag related to a personal issue, and he brought it out and asked for a signature. The character attendant declined and explained that performers stay in character, but Darren repeated the request, raising his voice as the refusal stayed the same. People nearby began to pay attention as the interaction continued. Instead of letting it go, he stepped back and reached into his bag for a solid crystal Mickey figurine he had purchased earlier that day. It was heavier than most souvenirs, with a smooth, polished surface that made it harder to grip securely. While waiting in line, he had been eating, leaving his hands slightly greasy without really noticing. He moved several feet back from the queue, just enough to give himself space, then turned to face the character again. People nearby were still watching, some already sensing the tension from the earlier exchange. Darren raised his arm and made a throwing motion with one hand, aiming toward the character. But as he released the figurine, it slipped from his grip mid-motion. The weight shifted unexpectedly in his hand, and instead of a clean throw, it threw off his balance completely. His upper body leaned back as he tried to correct, but his footing didn't follow. He took a quick step backward, then another, trying to stabilize himself, but his movement had already gone out of sync. The ground beneath him wasn't perfectly even, and with his weight shifting too fast, he couldn't regain control. He lost his balance and fell backward onto the brick pavement, landing hard on his back and neck. The impact didn't look dramatic at first, just a fall, but the angle of it forced his head and upper spine into the ground with more force than it appeared. For a moment, people hesitated. It still looked like something he might recover from, but he didn't move. Staff approached quickly and began clearing the area as bystanders realized he wasn't getting up. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began assessment, but he was unresponsive. He was later pronounced at the scene. The cause of death was determined to be severe cervical spine trauma resulting from the backward fall. Investigators reviewed footage and witness recordings and found no equipment failure or external malfunction. The sequence came down to a single moment: the loss of grip, the shift in balance, and the fall that followed. For me, this wasn't about crossing a line. It was a few small decisions that led to one fall he couldn't stop. The next case stuck with me for a different reason, because this time, it isn't about frustration or expectations. It's about someone deciding they couldn't wait a few more minutes and trying to force their own exit instead. It was June 2nd, 2017, in Anaheim, California. Inside the Sleeping Beauty Castle walkthrough, the space was tight and dim, with guests moving in a slow, steady line past glass displays. Everything about it was controlled: low ceilings, narrow paths, and constant flow. Nothing about it felt like a place where anything serious could happen. Eric Dalton, 29, had been in the park since late morning, moving from ride to ride without much of a break. He worked freelance jobs, the kind that came and went, and when something didn't meet expectations, it stuck with him longer than it should. By the time he reached the castle, that feeling had already built up. The walkthrough wasn't what he expected. No open towers, no wide views, just enclosed scenes behind glass, people passing through quickly, barely stopping. It felt more like a hallway than a castle. He kept moving, but the disappointment didn't go away. Halfway through, the path opened slightly into a small balcony area overlooking a lower section of the walkway. It wasn't meant for guests. A rope barrier and a small sign marked it for staff only. Most people didn't even look at it. They just kept moving with the line. Eric didn't. He stepped over the rope without hesitation, the same way people ignore small barriers when they don't feel serious. The space didn't offer much, just a slightly higher view of the same narrow path. But along the edge was a low, decorative ledge, built to look like part of the castle wall. It looked solid, stable, like something you could lean on. He walked up to it and rested his hand on top. It didn't move. No warning, no shift in weight, just a firm surface that felt real enough. Instead of stepping back, he turned and leaned his weight onto it, like someone taking a quick seat or bracing themselves for a better view. The balance wasn't there. The ledge wasn't designed to support that kind of weight, and the top surface had less grip than it looked. His center of gravity shifted past the edge, and without anything to catch himself on, his body tipped forward. From the level below, people saw it happen in a split second. One moment he was above them, just outside the normal path. The next, he dropped over the edge and hit the lower walkway hard. The sound cut through the space, sharp, immediate. Movement stopped. People turned, but for a second, no one reacted. It didn't register right away what had just happened. Staff reached the area quickly and cleared the walkway as emergency services were called. He was unresponsive when they got to him. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but the impact had already caused critical injuries. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later confirmed the cause of death as severe blunt force trauma from a fall, consistent with losing balance from an elevated position and landing directly onto a hard surface below. Investigators reviewed the area and found no structural failure. The barrier had been in place, clearly marking the section as restricted. The ledge itself was decorative, stable enough to appear real, but not intended for use, and not designed to support body weight or provide secure footing. And when you look at it like that, the decision itself was simple: stepping over a barrier and using something that wasn't meant to be used, or force anything open. He just assumed it was safe and acted on it. And I keep thinking about that because it's the kind of thing you see all the time. People testing something quickly and trusting it right after. But where do you even draw the line? Because just a few years later, in another part of the park, someone else made a similar call. Except this time, it wasn't about climbing or leaning. It was about trying to take a shortcut and not realizing the system around them was already moving. If these stories are getting to you the same way they're getting to me, you're in the right place. Subscribe now. We cover cases like this every week. It was September 11, 2015, at the loading area of a slow-moving boat ride in Anaheim, California. And from where most people stood, it looked like a calm, routine moment as boats drifted in a steady line along a concealed track, sliding past each other with small, consistent gaps between them. The movement was predictable, controlled, and quiet enough that nothing about it felt urgent. Daniel Reeves, 31, sat midway through the ride, shifting slightly in his seat as the same looping song continued around him. And what stood out about him wasn't anything unusual at first, just that he had reached a point where he didn't want to be there anymore. He worked long hours in logistics, was used to solving problems quickly, and when something felt off, he didn't like waiting for someone else to fix it. I've seen that kind of reaction before. And if I'm being honest, I understand it. Because when something feels simple, you convince yourself there's an easy way out, even when you're not supposed to create one. As the boat moved forward, Daniel leaned slightly toward the edge, looking past the row of identical boats ahead of him toward the loading dock in the distance. And instead of waiting for the ride to finish or signaling a staff member, he focused on the small gaps between the boats as they moved. Those gaps between the boats were narrow, consistent, and never meant for anything to enter, because the entire system depended on fixed spacing and continuous motion that didn't account for interruption. The boats themselves were made of rigid fiberglass, heavy enough to hold their alignment as they followed the track. And although they moved slowly, they were not designed to stop on demand unless the entire ride was shut down, which meant the spacing, timing, and movement all remained constant regardless of what happened inside that space. Daniel shifted forward in his seat and then stood up, drawing a few glances from nearby riders who noticed the movement but didn't react immediately, since it didn't look urgent at first, just someone adjusting position in a slow-moving ride where nothing seemed to escalate quickly. That hesitation allowed him to continue, because without an obvious sign of danger, no one stepped in. He stepped onto the edge of his boat and tested his balance briefly before shifting his weight forward and attempting to step across to the next one as it moved alongside. The movement was unstable, his footing uncertain, but he managed to stay upright just long enough to keep going. That initial success mattered because it likely removed any hesitation and replaced it with confidence. He moved again, attempting to cross another gap as the boats continued their steady motion toward the loading area. But this time, the spacing wasn't aligned the same way, and that small difference was enough to change everything. As he pushed off, the next boat drifted just out of position, and instead of landing securely, his foot dropped into the narrow space between the two hulls, where it became pinned as the boats continued moving forward, the pressure building as the gap tightened around it. At first, it didn't appear serious because there was no immediate collapse or violent reaction, just a delayed realization that his foot wasn't coming back up. He tried to pull it free, but the grip held firmly, and the same traction in his boot that normally gave him stability now worked against him. locking it in place between two solid surfaces that continued to move without stopping. As the system carried the boats forward, his leg remained pinned and his balance gave out as his upper body pitched forward, leaving him reaching for support that didn't exist because everything around him was moving at the same controlled pace. People nearby began to notice the shift, but by the time the urgency became clear, he had already lost the ability to recover. The motion of the ride kept his leg locked in place as his body dropped awkwardly against the edge of the boat and surrounding structure, limiting his ability to pull himself up or reposition. Although a ride operator was alerted and initiated a stop, the system slowed gradually rather than instantly, and those few seconds allowed the situation to worsen beyond recovery. By the time the ride came to a full stop, his leg remained trapped while his upper body had been forced into a compressed position against the boat and surrounding structure, restricting his ability to breathe or free himself. Staff reached him quickly and attempted to release the pressure, but the positioning required careful handling before he could be freed. Paramedics arrived within minutes and took over, but there was no effective breathing and no sustained pulse, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later confirmed the cause of death as asphyxia associated with entrapment, meaning his leg became pinned and his body was forced into a position where his chest could not expand properly, leading to rapid loss of consciousness. And this is the part that stays with me. He made a choice to step between moving boats like it was nothing. But was saving a few seconds really worth it? Let's move on to the next one I found, because this one's even more frustrating. It starts with something not working, and one quick attempt to fix it that ends up being the worst decision in the room. It was December 22, 2018, in Orlando, Florida. The park was crowded, and inside one of the interactive shooting games, guests rotated through stations lined with mounted blasters, flashing targets, and constant sound effects designed to keep everything moving without pause. Daniel Cruz, 26, had been in the park most of the day and stepped inside the attraction to cool off. He worked night shifts as a hotel maintenance technician, picking up extra hours after his younger sister dropped out of school, trying to cover bills their family couldn't keep up with. This trip was supposed to be a break, something simple he could afford. The setup was simple. Stand in place, grab the blaster, and shoot at targets as they lit up. Everything felt controlled and routine, like nothing there could actually hurt you. Daniel took his position as the station opened. The blaster was fixed to a mount with a cable running into the base. Around him, people were doing the same thing, pulling triggers, leaning forward, adjusting their aim. It all felt routine. Then his blaster stopped working. He pulled the trigger again. Nothing. The targets kept moving, but his score didn't change. Instead of stepping back or waiting for the staff, looking down at the base where the cable disappeared into the console, there was a warning label on the lower panel, small, easy to ignore, printed near a seam where the casing met the floor. Most people wouldn't even notice it. Daniel did, but not in the way it was intended. He stepped closer and nudged at the panel with his shoe, like he was testing if it was loose. When it didn't move much, he crouched slightly and used his fingers to pry at the edge, trying to see if something had come loose inside. And I've seen people do that exact thing. Something stops working, and instead of leaving it alone, they start poking at it, like they can fix it in a few seconds. The panel shifted just enough. Not fully open, not broken, just enough to expose a narrow gap behind it where wiring ran into the unit. It wasn't meant to be accessed, but it wasn't completely sealed either. He reached in. It wasn't deep, like adjusting a cable or pressing something back into place. From the outside, it looked harmless. Plastic casing, low lighting, nothing that suggested real danger. But the position forced his weight forward, his balance centered over a narrow base while one hand was inside the unit. As he adjusted his grip, his footing shifted slightly. It wasn't a dramatic slip, just enough to throw off his balance. With one hand still inside the opening and nothing stable to hold onto, he couldn't correct in time. His body tipped backward as his foot lost traction on the smooth flooring. He fell hard onto the ground behind him, the back of his head and neck taking the full force of the impact against the floor. The sound cut through the noise of the attraction, sharp enough to draw attention, but not immediately understood. For a moment, it still looked like a simple fall. People nearby noticed first, then staff. He didn't move. The system was shut down as employees rushed over and cleared the area. Emergency services arrived quickly and began resuscitation, but there was no sustained response. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The medical examiner later ruled the cause of death as severe blunt force trauma to the head and cervical spine, consistent with a backward fall onto a hard surface. Investigators found that the panel had been partially loosened, but there was no equipment failure. The unit was not designed to be accessed, and the risk came from reaching into a restricted space while off balance. And when you break it down, the part that stands out isn't the equipment. It's how simple the decision was. He didn't break anything open completely, didn't force tools into it. He just saw something not working, pushed at it a little, and reached into a space he wasn't supposed to touch. It's the kind of thing people do all the time. Tapping machines, checking cables, trying to fix something in the moment because it feels faster than waiting. And most of the time, nothing happens. But this time it did. And that's what makes it feel so unnecessary.